Greetings, everyone. Welcome to MBA 720 broadcast. Today we're going to talk about data and analytics. And what's interesting about data and analytics is certainly we can be fooled by numbers. We can be fooled by our own predisposition to respond to biases and things like that. So this is just a summary of 8 challenges that one might face when they look at data and analytics. So let's dive right in and take a look at what the research shows. So interestingly enough, when you think about data analytics, it is all within the context of decision making. And many times, some of the things that we learn, even in our education and throughout life, can benefit us, and sometimes they can cause us to be biased or to maybe interpret things the wrong way. So this is a fun way to take a look at some of that and to try to think about, what can throw us off in terms of making decisions. So without further ado, here we go. One of the things that's interesting is that numbers have life. It's not just symbols on a paper or things that we count. What we really want to understand when you think about technology, innovation, artificial intelligence, all of these things, is the story behind the numbers. What are the numbers telling us? And through that, can we get the right story, and can we get some revelation or some insight that is unique and novel? And something that might lead us on a different path, or maybe a more innovative path. So that's what we're all looking at with numbers. So let's dive in again. 8 challenges when interpreting data and analytics. Challenge number 1, the flaw of averages. One of the things that's interesting about the flaw of averages is captured in this cartoon. The case of a statistician who drowns while crossing a river that is on average 3 feet deep. Now, what's really interesting about the average is that it's the first thing we teach everyone to calculate. Certainly in my program of study in undergraduate and graduate education, that was the first thing. You calculate the average, and once you did that, it seemed magical that you had this number that really gave you a lot of information. But what's interesting about an average is actually data reduction. You actually have less information when you calculate the average. Further, one of the things that's interesting is that the assumption of average, that the average is ideal. It's any deviation from average is error. And you've heard this maybe from time to time. Certainly in my family, from time to time they would say, well, someone is above average, someone is below average, or he is average. And it's really interesting how we take the average and sort of apply it to things and feel like we've got some more information when we have actually less information. There's actually an industry that is devoted to the average. You have 16 personality types. You have the principles of scientific management, which are really set upon calculating numbers, calculating the average and the deviation from average. What's really, really interesting about these things is that the more science that's done around these things, the more you realize that categorization around average is not as useful as we might think it is. For example, in personality types, one of the first cuts that they make is in terms of extroversion and introversion. Are you an extrovert? Are you an introvert? And one of the things that's really interesting about that is that science and psychology tells us that there is no real introvert or extrovert personality type. People are extroverted or introverted depending on their context. So you may be introverted in one context and maybe extroverted in another. And I know certainly it's true for me that I probably tend more on the extroverted scale, but there are times when I think go into introvert mode. If I'm less comfortable or less engaged in something, then I become more of an introvert. Now, the mistake that can be made with that is that we classify someone as an introvert and decide, okay, they can't be a customer servicing type of person because they're an introvert. We assume that extroverts are the best customer service reps. when in actuality, there are some introverts that do quite well in small groups. So if the engagement is one-on-one, perhaps a financial planner with a customer, the introverted personality might actually be the best personality for the customer servicing task at hand. So it's one of those things, again, where we classify, then we make some broad assumptions about that, which sometimes can be a mistake. Even in the medical field, there was a tendency many, many years ago to classify the average brain and the average tumor within the brain. And one of the things that's interesting about cancer, as far as the way it presents itself, is that it's not the same for everybody. So you can see here in this diagram, you've got subject 1, subject 2, and subject 3, and then you've got the average. But notice that the average is not representative of any of the 3 subjects. Yet, a lot of medicine and a lot of science around healthcare was built on what the average patient presented. So you can see here lots of room to make a lot of mistakes if we're developing remedies for the average when no one is really average. So if we think about it, how does that get into the data? Well, one of the things that's really interesting about the average is this idea of jaggedness. Now, what a jaggedness concept is, or jagged concept, is multidimensional. Let me demonstrate. If you take a look at this diagram and I ask you the question, which man is taller, then clearly you're going to go to the right and say the man on the right is taller. You would be correct. And what it also means is that height is a non-jagged concept. It's not jagged. Height is measurable. It is something that is demonstratable and something that is universally understood, and it's one measure. It's height. Feet and inches, and you can guess which man is taller there to the right. If I ask you which man is bigger, now we're into a jagged concept where there are multi-dimensions that might explain that particular concept. And if you take a look at the diagram and I ask you which man is bigger, you'd be surprised to know that they are equal. And that's because bigness is measured on height, weight, shoulders, reach, chest, torso, waist, hips, and legs. And if you look at those measures right there in the middle of the diagram, they are actually equal collectively for each of the other persons. So they are equal in terms of which is bigger. So one of the mistakes that we can make is to mistake a jagged concept, something that has multiple measures, as a jagged concept, something that has one measure. For example, customer satisfaction is likely a jagged concept, many aspects of it, rather than just one score. And that's why on some of the better surveys, you'll see multiple questions around customer service or your satisfaction with a product or service. They're recognizing that it is a jagged concept. So again, just a way to think differently about averages and about that, the way we interpret them. So one of the things that we can take away from the flaw of averages is that we want to analyze and aggregate rather than aggregate and analyze. The way that we have constantly talked about statistics for a long time is to aggregate, then analyze. Calculate the mean and then draw some conclusions. Today, what we would rather do is analyze the data before we aggregate it. And of course, that is made possible or certainly made easier by artificial intelligence. Certainly Claude, Gemini, Chat GPT, whatever you like to use there, we can prompt it, teach it about the data we're looking at, and have it go in and analyze before we calculate an average. We can get clusters across multiple variates. We can get different scores that tell us about the data before we lose that information by aggregating it. Certainly one of the big uses of artificial intelligence these days. Certainly something I really do in my own research. I will get a data set and have Claude take a look at it, tell me about the data in raw form before I start going in and calculating averages, standard deviations, and all of those things. So if you substitute knowledge about a group for an individual, meaning you calculate an average, you might be wrong. You're actually losing data. So this is, again, one of the ways, or one of the 8 challenges in decision making. We teach everyone so much about the average, we don't realize that it is actually a fairly flawed statistic, for deep insight. The second one is extrapolation, and this is a fun one. So let's just take a look at this story, okay? This is you, cool you. You've worked at a job for over 20 years. Wonderful, you've done well. You've driven home for 20 years. And let's get into some data. You made it safely home 1,998 out of 2,000 trips. I went ahead and calculated it for you, 99%. The other incidents were very minor and not your fault. Someone bumped into you in the parking lot. Maybe you hit a curb or something like that. But your record of making it home is 99%. Stellar over 20 years. But there's more to the story. This is your best friend. And he's worked at the same place you do for almost 20 years as well. What a wonderful thing that your best friend, he or she has worked at your same place for 20 years. But bad news, they found a better job and they're quitting. And you are so sad. However, the office is going to throw a party and you drink 5 vodka martinis to help celebrate. In fact, your best friend says one more for the road. So you kick back that 6th vodka martini. Now, the question of the day is, should you drive home? Now, there's an obvious answer. 6 vodka martinis, you would say absolutely no, we shouldn't drive home. But is there data in this scenario that tells you you should try it? There actually is. You made it safely home 1,998 out of 2,000 trips. So mentally, you might be saying the statistics are with me. Okay, this is where we can make a mistake in decision making. On the left, that is called within sample data. So within sample, you have made it home safely 99% of the time. Within sample. However, the scenario on the right is what we call out of sample data. It's out of sample data. So what this means is that it's a different situation. And clearly, the situation that is different is that you've had 6 vodka martinis. So the lesson for us here, don't make a decision on out of sample situations using in sample data. It's not the same. Now, it's really interesting. You say, now, wait a minute. Surely businesses and leaders don't do that. Yes, they do it all the time. Walmart, when they said, went into Germany and said, everybody will love us. America loves us, so Germany will love us. Well, within sample in the United States, yes, people love Walmart. Out of sample in Germany, not so much. So it's really kind of interesting when you think about extrapolation. We extrapolate in sample data to an out of sample context. And I think that's the thing you want to pick up here. Don't mistake an out of sample challenge for an in sample challenge. The data simply doesn't apply. All right, moving on. Overfitted data. This is one that's really good when we think about artificial intelligence. Too much analysis can lead to false conclusions. Now, what's interesting about that is artificial intelligence can make data more sophisticated than it is. And it's really, really interesting when you start to think about that. As we teach more to our artificial intelligence partners, if you want to call it that, Claude, Gemini, Chat GPT, whatever you like to use, as we teach them more, as we make more decisions leaning on that data, what can happen is the artificial intelligence agent or companion, if you want to think about that way, can start to make things more sophisticated than it is. Let me give you an example. This is something that you will never see in data collection, all the data. You've got the triangles. and you've got the circles. So this is all the data. When we have all the data that's available, we can easily draw a curve to explain the data. And that's what you see in this diagram. The curve there is really explaining the data. This is what you actually get. So take a look between this, all the data, and what you actually collect. You collect a subsample of the data. We can never get all the data. We can collect a subsample of it. This is the same way that artificial intelligence algorithms are trained, and hopefully what you get in the training of an artificial intelligence model is that it is trained on one set of data, and then it is actually tested on another set of data. You want to see how it does on a new set of data. So this is the data you collect. It is not the full set of data. And so what we could do is ask Gemini or Claude or one of the other agents out there to test this out. And what it would do is it would draw a curve. Now what it would do is overfit it. It's drawing a very complex curve, the solid line, vis-a-vis the real line, which is the dotted line there. So you've got something very, very sophisticated, and what you've done is overfit the data. This is the best fit on the data. So, the thing that you have to be careful of is not to lean too much on technology. It might overfit it. Don't forget that many times the simplest explanation might be the right explanation. For example, if you've got sniffles, cough, congestion, runny nose, backache, and foot pain in the morning, you go to ChatGPT and you ask it, what do I have? And it comes back and says, based on those symptoms, you have scoliosis and COVID. What you've done is you've overtrained the model. You've given it too many symptoms. It's going out there trying to fit them all together. You go to your doctor, you complain, hey, I've got scoliosis and COVID and the Black Plague on top of it. Your doctor reassures you that you don't have any of that. What happened is you have a common cold and you stepped on a Lego. You get the idea. Many times we can overtrain, we can over-rely on technology, and sometimes the simplest explanation is the right explanation. Don't forget simplicity, and don't forget common sense when you're taking a look at data and analytics. Next is the modeling mistake. Let's jump into this one real quick and see what it means. If you think about a modeling mistake, statistics isn't just statistics anymore. Now let me explain that. One of the things that we have, I think, relied upon, certainly in the tradition of scientific management, is descriptive modeling. And what descriptive modeling did is it looked at past data as a basis for predicting what will happen in the future. There's nothing particularly wrong with that. You can certainly see the logic of it. We can even start to put probabilities around it. This is not hard. Notice that this is a normal distribution centered on the mean. Okay, remember we talked about that earlier. One standard deviation forward and behind. We got 68% of the observations. Two standard deviations forward and behind the mean, 95, and then we pretty much account for everything, plus or minus 3 standard deviations. Easy calculations, no real magic here. And what we can do is say, okay, the next observation will likely fall somewhere on the normal distribution this percent of the time. But very, very useful. It organizes data. It gives us some semblance of certainty, but as you can see here, it is centered on the mean, and it assumes a normal distribution. Believe me, not all data is a normal distribution. Now, to give you an example of how this might apply, if I was going to ask if it's going to rain tomorrow, what I might do to calculate that or give a percentage is just look on this particular date 50 years in the past and ask the question, did it rain? And I might come in and say, well, it was 60% of the time it rained on this day in the past 50 years. Therefore, tomorrow, 60% chance of rain. That would be the way that You might calculate that. And you're going to be right on some days and wrong on some other days. The fundamental problem is that you're using the past to predict the future and you're ignoring today's data. If you think about what should weight heavier, it should be the things that we record today or yesterday, not 50 years behind. So the way that this is remedied is predictive modeling. To describe what will happen tomorrow or in the future based on the most relevant data. And the way we do that is with Bayesian inference. And if you look at Bayesian inference, it's really based on conditional probability. There's nothing really, really hard here, but it is very, very clever from the standpoint that we try to predict what will happen next based on what has happened now and based on priors. And so you might have a situation where we have a vaccine and 90% of the time it's going to identify, or let's just say not a vaccine, but a test, for COVID. 90% of the time it's accurate. So you have COVID and it tells you have COVID. 10% of the time it might tell you that you have COVID, but you don't. And so that would be a false positive. Well, if we look at the priors, what is the probability of you having COVID in the first place? We can start there. So if you're worried about having COVID, you say, okay, what are my chances of having it? And we can calculate that out very, very correctly. Then we can calculate in the test itself and say, okay, 90% chance if you have COVID, it's going to pick it up. 10% chance you don't have it, but it tells you you've got COVID. Your prior is that you've got probably out of the entire population 95% chance of not being infected. So what's really interesting about that situation is not what is the probability of the test telling me I'm positive and I am positive. It is what is the probability of me having COVID the probability of me of getting a positive test and having COVID, which you add the priors in there, the probability of you having COVID, before you take the test. And that's what Bayesian inference does. It's called inverse probability. And what it does is just basically gives you a calculation, the probability of B given A, probability of A given B, being that probability of B given A times the probability of A divided by the probability of B. The thing for you to remember, it's a ratio. And what that ratio gives you is some conditional probability out there. This is what artificial intelligence is based on, this probability. And it's predictive statistics. So going back to the weather forecasting model, we would capture variables of interest, the moisture in the atmosphere, the dew point, the clouds, weather systems to the left, weather systems to the right. We would calculate all that in and say, what is the probability of rain tomorrow given the conditions of today, ignoring a lot of that past data. And that would be predictive modeling. Predictive modeling. There's a great book on this. I know that, professors love to give you books to read on things like this, but it's one of the best ones I've read on it, and it's entertaining. It's called The Signal and the Noise. And the author talks about everything from predicting earthquakes to sports betting, all the way through using Bayesian statistics. And it's written really for lay people. And that's why I bought it. I've done a lot of math in my time, but I wanted something that I could read and absorb pretty fast. And it's a really good book for that. So don't mistake a descriptive modeling task for a predictive modeling task. Again, artificial intelligence, very, very useful for predictive modeling. All right, we are 4 through the 8, so let's do the other half here. Runaway addition. One of the things that's really interesting, when you're faced with an innovation challenge, there's a strong tendency to add. We add things. We add rules. We add software. We add policies. We add procedures. Adding is a very managerial thing. Now, the reason that this is true is because when we add something, we can demonstrate progress. We can demonstrate that an additional resource has been added. One of the things that's interesting about innovation is that many times we can accomplish more through subtraction, doing less. Maybe we have too many policies and procedures. Maybe there are too many qualifications for that job description. Maybe the job description itself is too complicated. One of the things that I really hope I can emphasize to you in this broadcast is the beauty and sometimes the magic that you can achieve by doing less, subtracting. Now, let me give you an example. When you go to Washington, D.C., you see a city of grand monuments. And nobody does it better than the United States, I think, or certainly we're among the best in memorializing presidents and things that have happened in Washington, D.C. We do this with grand monuments, and they're wonderful. There's no criticism of that at all. I still feel like a little kid when I walk to the Washington Monument or through the Lincoln Memorial. However, there is a monument in Washington, D.C. that does more than all of the grand monuments, yet you can't see it from the airport. In fact, you can't see it from the ground until you walk upon it. And that monument is the Vietnam Memorial. And what it does that no other monument does is that it captures every casualty of the war on the wall in chronological order. So it is a real collective memorial to the individuals that sacrificed it all for this particular war. And it's a place of very great healing. My father was a person that was deployed twice to Vietnam, and when the wall was completed, his first task was certainly to go over there and find the names of people that he knew that did not make it back. And one of those was his first cousin, Tommy Segars. And he went and found Tommy's name on the wall, and he found other people that he knew. And I can tell you, being a little kid at the time, he came away a healed man. Certainly it helped for him to know that those men and women were captured on that wall forever and memorialized. So interestingly enough, that particular memorial did more by doing less. So what we want to do when we think about innovation and you start to combine it with numbers, subtract, add, and modify for best results. Many times, less is more. I think that's one of my favorite ones. There's actually a good book on this topic. I know another book, right? It's called The Art of Subtraction, and I really, really like that book. It's just something that's really interesting, something that's very thought-provoking, and to my taste, something that is different. You know, maybe a little bit off the beaten path, something that you don't typically think about. All right, next on the list here, oversimplifying. This is sort of a bucket of different things. The self-fulfilling prophecy, we can't leave that out. Confirmation bias. You interpret and collect data to drive a desired conclusion. Yes, you can train AI models and you can prompt them to give you things that you're looking for rather than the whole information. That's why I think prompting is going to be one of the big keys in successful use of AI. We start to, and I'm still learning myself. I certainly made a career, or certainly started my computer science background in programming them, but using them to prompt has been something that certainly I've learned more about and come to appreciate. Well, the basic thing in this particular trap is that you can collect data at certain points in time to get the conclusion you want. That's confirmation bias in a nutshell. Take a look at the left here. If I collect global air temperature from 98 to 2012, no global warming. Warming is not happening. If I collect it on a broader basis from 1988 to 2012, now I can see a little bit of global warming. If we collect it from 1900 to 2012, you see even more evidence of that. So what you can take away from this is that, yes, there is global warming. However, if you look at the scale there, it's not as dramatic, I think, as some people who are very passionate about that believe. It does exist, and it does not mean that it might not cool down in the future. I mean, you just have to look at data for what it is. I mean, certainly it's tempting to throw an emotional blanket around it and make it, the cause that you're looking for here. Certainly hard sometimes not to do that. I really, feel like I have to train myself sometimes not to, again, throw that emotional blanket around it. But that's confirmation bias. First information is always weighted more than follow-up information. Let me show you an example. Research has found that people reliably decide which home pages they like and dislike within 50 milliseconds. 50 milliseconds. This suggests that impressions of websites are largely impacted by visual appeal, not content or usefulness. First information hits us hard. We don't really look at the retractions or the follow-up information. And I think that's really, really difficult in leadership. We have to sort of de-bias ourselves sometimes on that impact of first information out there. Exaggeration, speaking beyond the data, framing extremes, misdirection. Can there be any of that out there? Yes, I've got you some examples. Here's a diagram from Fox News. I absolutely love this one. The presidential run. Take a look at the pie diagram. There's only one problem with it, and I think you can see it. Doesn't add up to 100%. It's really, really interesting that was actually thrown up on Fox. Now, don't think me biased of one news channel over the other. CNN also does this. This is the worst data visualization from 2022. Baby formula shortage. You take a look at this, and what you believe is that there's 43% out of stock, but the diagram shows 100% out of stock. This actually caused panic and caused a lot of problems for grocery stores and for young parents. It was absolutely just incredibly misinformation out there. But what they're trying to do is drive an opinion. But you have to look at this really carefully, particularly if this diagram is first information. So you can get a double whammy here. You see a diagram like this, and it's the first thing you'd see. Even if CNN retracts it and gets a diagram that represents 43% rather than 100%, then you won't calculate that, or it won't have as much impact on you. What's really interesting too is that visual overrides the 43%. When you first look at it, you just see the whole United States covered in it. You go, oh my God, this is terrible. You don't look to the left and see the 43%. Imprinting, horoscopes, fortune tellers, personality tests. What celebrity am I? One of the things that we do is we imprint ourselves on some of the data we read. For example, there is a great website out there. Great in the sense that it's funny, not that it's accurate. 5 ways to figure out who you were in a past life. Now, this is a website. You put your information in there. It says it's AI based and all of this, so you're using the best artificial intelligence of the day to figure out who you were in a past life. Now, when you do this, I can guarantee you were a prince, a princess, a king, a queen, a shining knight, a warrior, a superhero, Supergirl, Superwoman, Wonder Woman, Superman, Spider-Man in a past life. It is not going to tell you that you were a fly flying around some piece of shit or something like that. It's going to tell you that you were something special, and you will imprint on it. You will say, well, I always felt like I was a former president of the United States, and no one recognized it. Thank God that this site is out there to recognize it. Now that's an extreme example. It's a funny example, and I hope you're laughing on the other end. But it's kind of interesting to think, wait a minute, do we imprint on stuff? Do I see a sales report and start to imprint, hey, it was my good effort. It was this, that, and the other, rather than standing back and saying, oh, wait a minute, what does this really mean? You get the idea. Imprinting is a very, very powerful thing out there. Loss aversion is another thing that we see out there in decision making. We tend to weigh loss more than value gain. So when we're thinking about information, particularly the odds of winning something, the odds of hitting something, the odds of getting that birdie in a golf score rather than a par, or in my case, a double bogey, we're going to tend to weigh that loss more than value gain. Now, where does this come into play? Well, what's really interesting is that you'll get a lot of free trials out there. So Spotify, Amazon Prime, there's a reason you get the free trial. You've been given a benefit. Once that trial period ends, it's hard to give it up. Now, I know you may be one of those who is able to give it up. I am one of those that can give it up. But on average, once someone receives a benefit, the idea of losing that benefit overrides everything else. We weigh loss more than value gain, and it impacts decision making quite a bit out there. So that's oversimplification. All right, let's move on through the 8 here. We're at number 7, false attribution. This is the one that to me is the funniest, and I think you're gonna love some of the examples here. Of course, we cannot do data analytics and decision making without causation versus correlation. I think this is one that I heard maybe even in high school. I don't know. It's been around a long time. Interesting. When ice cream sales rise, so do homicides. Now, is that a coincidence, or will your ice cream cone murder you? Well, obviously, ice cream sales are not related to homicides. So there must be a unifying, systematic, underlying cause. Summer is when people get together. More specifically, casual drinkers and drug users are more likely to go to bars, parties on the weekends and evenings. These people in the social mix flooding the city streets and neighborhoods feed the peak times for murder. So what's really happening with ice cream sales and the murder rate is warm weather. More people out, more chances for mischief out there. But ice cream sales are not related to murder rate. So one of the things you have to, and again, an extreme example, I know, but if you start to think about it in your next meeting, when you start to see someone try to explain data or start to think about, why is this? Watch out for this particular challenge, that they may mistake correlation with causation. Well, let's get into a fun one. Community myth. A belief about an event by a large amount of people, that's false. We also call these corporate myths. What's really interesting in any organization or community, there are myths that are held as truths that are simply not true. They're not true. Now, I'll give you a quick example of this. I was working with Joint Special Operations Command, and I was just helping them try to plot innovative supply routes. And one of the things that was interesting, our research team had kind of come up with a way to move material and things around Europe that we thought was innovative and thought that it was pretty interesting to do. And the head of the command came back and said, you can't do that because of Title 10. And if you don't know, Title 10 is basically law that really, almost, I won't say intrudes, but basically defines what you can buy, what you can't buy, where you can send it, all sorts of things. So it's government intrusion on military contracting, We can talk about that at another time. But in any case, he can't do it because it's Title 10. Well, immediately I responded to the senior commander. I said, "Well, that's interesting. Can I test that?" And his response was pretty dramatic. He said, "You can go in and test all you want to, but I'm telling you, Title 10 forbids it." And I said, "Great. Let me just test it, and I'd like to come back, and talk about this later." Now, what I was doing was basically sort of leaning on the things that I had learned in working with Apple and Pixar. We were constantly doing that. And we didn't, view that as an insult, but we did not like to leave things untested. Again, we were pretty detailed people. Let's figure out if we can do it or not, rather than just throw this out. Well, long story short, we went out and tested it. You can do it. So that supply route was legal. It did fall within the framework of Title 10, and it was a great framework. Now, the people that believe these myths aren't bad people. That's not what I'm trying to say. But an organizational myth is a very powerful thing, and it's handed from one leadership group to another. One of the things that the psychologists call this is the Mandela effect. Now, here's why they call it the Mandela effect. There is a false memory, particularly among Americans, that Nelson Mandela, the South American anti-apartheid leader, died in prison in the 1980s. So, on average, if you were to ask fairly intelligent Americans what happened to Nelson Mandela, that's what they will tell you. However, that's not the reality. He died in 2013, decades after his release from prison, and he was actually the president of South Africa. It's just a false memory. Now, again, don't dive down this rabbit hole of saying, well, are people bad or people biased? No, it's a collective memory. It is something that gets into an organization or a group of people, and it becomes fact. What I call it is rules that don't exist. It's really sort of, and I see them at UNC. I've seen them almost in every organization that I've been involved with, rules that don't exist. Now, we can play a game here. Take a look at the apple in the Garden of Eden. Very, very popular story, and found in the Bible that Eve partook of the apple. The problem is it's not in the Bible. It says a fruit. So the poor apple has gotten just a terrible reputation, undeserved, in the Bible. Take a look at this, Curious George's tale. Is the real Curious George on the left or the right? It is the one on the right. Fruit Loops or Fruit Loops. Left or right? It is the one on the right. Fruit Loops. Fruit Loops. Jiffy, this is one, I think graduate students, anybody like us that have gone through graduate school, we know this one. It is actually the one on the right. Here's a tougher one. Monopoly Man. Is it the one on the left or the right? It is the one on the left. He does not have a monocle. What psychologists tell us is that we're misconstruing the Monopoly Man for Mr. Peanut, who does have a monocle. The idea here is that we can get into these community myths. Another thing that we want to do as decision makers is practice contrary thinking. Can we shake the mind back and forth? Can we look at the other side of things? Reversing and reaffirming positive views. Now, the reason that this is really, really important is because there is a broader form of community myth out there that is propagated by media, and I think sometimes can be very dangerous, and it's called crowd thinking. One of the things that's true about crowd thinking, and it's never been more prominent than today, is that it's based on emotion. Now again, this is not me talking about this. These are the psychologists that talk about this, that crowd thinking is based on emotion. You lose your individuality. It's more important to be part of the movement than to think for yourself. It's exaggerated, it's extreme, it spreads like wildfire, and it's often wrong. Now, again, I'm going to throw this one out there. One of the prime examples that the psychologists use out there is the defund the police movement. If you defund the police, places don't become safer. And in fact, in the absence of police protection, organized crime takes its place, and you have racketeering. So rather than having your neighborhood police protecting your place of business, you've got the local mafia or the local gang protecting your place of business. And as anyone who's experienced that can tell you, that is not a good thing. The point I want to make here is that in today's world, this type of thinking becomes very prevalent, and it can take over an organization. We can get, kind of crazy about certain things, and it all builds up, and suddenly you've got a real problem. I think in 2008, the market crash and the housing crisis was built on crowd thinking, that this could last forever, that people could pay loans that they couldn't afford. A lot of things that just seemed very contrary became part of the discussion based on emotion. This has happened in the past. The year 2000, we were supposed to, all banks will fail, food supplies will be depleted, stock market will crash. Nothing happened in January 2000. Nothing happened. And so it was really, really interesting where, panic and crowd thinking comes into play. Many, many years ago, there was a radio broadcast of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. That radio broadcast terrified the nation. People thought that Martians were really landing on the planet. And every car crash, every weird thing that happened out of the next few days was blamed on the Martians. So again, you've got a couple of things happening here. You've got crowd thinking, and you've got people that are taking data and making it fit their narrative. Can it happen in the modern world? Yes, it can. Theranos. If you take a look at that particular business, and what happened is you just had something that was absolutely unbelievable, something that could not have happened or was not possible, and yet a compelling story, a appealing persona, money, looking for a place to be invested. All of this can, lead to something that is absolutely wonderful to think about, but isn't really, really true. And yes, even in today's world, we have this community thinking going on because Amazon will tell you, hey, here are the best-selling products. The best-selling products aren't necessarily the best product for you. So to me, false attribution is a real fun one. Well, last but not least, we're going to talk about this in another video, the second part of this broadcast. An organization can't do everything. One of the things that you have to do in analytics is achieve simplicity through focus. Now, the way that this was done in Apple certainly was one of the hallmarks of good leadership. Basically, what Apple believed is that if everything is important, nothing is important. So what they did is they went in and cut their product line by 70%. Eliminated bloated product lines, regained core identity, controlled the user experience. We wouldn't have iPod, we wouldn't have iMac, we wouldn't have the laptops, we wouldn't have iPad, we wouldn't have iWatch, we wouldn't have any of it if Apple couldn't have regained its focus. And that can be the hardest thing to do. And the way we do this is with investment triage. New initiatives have to be prioritized. Initiatives that no longer perform, perhaps they need to be purged. The savings from purged projects are used to fund new and more important initiatives. Even within Apple, after they did this purge in 97, there was another one around 2003 where Apple purged itself of the Apple G3 computer. And what they were trying to do there was to prioritize. They were trying to regain the focus in their business out there. And so this is so important. We're going to dedicate another short video to it and talk about it and give you a chance to practice investment triage on your own. And I think that will be fun. But for today's video, what I really wanted to kind of focus you on and get you thinking about is that in a world of data, in a world of analytics, we still have to be careful what we talk about, what we see, and what we maybe infer is what the word I'm looking for in terms of the data we see, the analytics we collect. Once again, thanks for being part of the broadcast. I hope this has been useful, and best of luck in everything that you do.